Hello everybody, I hope you are doing well. So after releasing my debut video on this channel, it has been pointed out to me that a personal reintroduction may be useful. I didn't deem it necessary to record an introduction video at the time, but I have come round to the view that it may be a good idea, because I'm essentially starting afresh. I've been detached from the infotainment circuit for some time now, and the result of that is that while I've stayed relatively tuned in with current affairs, not least because for all my best efforts I remain a social precariat in an economically dilapidating UK, nobody really knows who I am anymore. So as such, I'd like to use this video to explain who I am, what I do, what I have been doing over the last few years, and why I have started this channel. So my name is Thomas Dowling. I'm basically a freelance academic. I completed my PhD in philosophy this year at the University of York, a project I started back in 2019. My research spans German idealism, Marxism, Western Marxism, the philosophy of religion, political philosophy, and the first generation of critical theory known as the Frankfurt School. However, I'm particularly interested in Hegel's philosophy of history, his concept of cyclicite, and something known among critical theorists as the phenomenon of reification. Hence the final title of my thesis, A Hegelian Theory of Reification. Sorry. As some of you probably know, the overwhelmingly dominant theoretical models that shape the policies of social institutions at present are all based on either Marxist or intersectional interpretations of the social pathologies that manifest in the modern world. Because of this, my Hegelian reconstruction of reification, my project, poses a pretty strong challenge, not just to the academic status quo, but to our overall understanding of knowledge and self-knowledge, our understanding of human freedom, our understanding of the essential relationship between reason and instrumental rationality, what social progress amounts to, how we understand modernity as a concept and as a historical process. Most importantly, perhaps, what social infrastructure, as in what sort of institutions we need, what's actually required in that sense for human beings to live freely, not just in principle, but in practice. Now, what makes me, I guess, a bit of an oddball in the eyes of, an extreme oddball in the eyes of the current academic milieu, is the fact that I'm not as interested in the study of Hegel as a philosopher and studying the history of ideas as much as I am in studying and engaging with world history and politics in the conceptual and dialectical way that Hegel did. This speculative intellectual activity, known in critical theory circles as immanent critique, I've noticed has been mysteriously absent in the literature for decades, which I've always suspected is probably because applying the presuppositionless method, that is immanent critique, to today's historical conditions, as Hegel did for his time, would actually expose the dominant strands of so-called critical theory and critical social theory, such as intersectional feminism and critical race theory, to be reified and ultimately fraudulent when understood on the terms of the original Frankfurt School. Hence my ongoing, defence of that tradition. I suspect that it's because, moreover, I've dared to be intellectually honest about these blind spots in the literature and in the humanities generally, that I've been so far unable to find employment or even a publisher for my thesis. In fact, academia has been so economically parasitic for me that the only way I could carry out this research into reification from the start was by being willing to part with literally everything I had in order to fund it. I can only afford to keep my research, or any form of research, going now, in fact, because I'm working on and off as an HGV driver, just to keep myself above the poverty line. I've written quite a few essays. Most of them are published on my Substack page called Works from the Oubliette, a name which is inspired half by Fyodor Dostoevsky, for obvious reasons, and half by my own experience of aggressive gatekeeping and shadow banning. So you can read all of the essays on there completely for free. I'll leave the link in the description, and if you want, you can post a comment too. You don't have to be a paid member to do that. But as I've said, you won't find all of my essays on there, which brings me on to this. The reason that my PhD took 5.5 years to complete, rather than the standard 4, is that I took a leave of absence to work for Carl Benjamin as a podcast presenter and staff writer at the podcast of the Lotus Eaters. I worked there for 9 months between October 21 and June 22, making a few sporadic guest appearances after leaving. One of them was in 2023, which was with my good friend Stelios on his Symposium series, and another was in 2024 for the All Nights UK general election coverage. My most valuable export when working on the podcast, however, other than my Deep Think essay on OnlyFans perhaps, is my critical based theory series, which I designed to serve as both a critical defence against the dark arts course and as a toolbox for the right to mitigate the discursive hyperreality. In other words, to not get caught up virtue signalling or doing things purely for algorithmic reward. Regrettably, the right's current trajectory suggests that toolbox is gathering dust in the corners of the old studio, which is why I've decided to start producing content again as a completely independent contributor without any hero shields. Now, some of you who have followed me ever since I left the podcast, and look, I'm not trying to flatter myself here, I know that isn't very many, may remember that I ran my own podcast for a while called The Gatsby Podcast. For several reasons, almost all of which were my own fault, it never really got off the ground. The main reasons why it didn't work, I think, were that I aimed too high at first. I mean, right from the start, I identified the podcast, the Lotus Eaters, and Academic Asians as my natural competitors, and their audiences as my target market. I became quickly disenfranchised while I failed to draw in their audiences. To be honest, I was especially miffed that I didn't get Academic Asians' attention at all. I thought that he might have paid some interest in what I was doing, given our intellectual common ground. I took a great interest in his contributions and wrote many Lotus Eaters articles that were directed at him and his audience. I even edited Cole's Deep Think essay on Warhammer 40k, which AA claimed was Cole's best written work at that time. Because Cole was a mutual connection, I thought he might have been willing to include me in some of his streams, because particularly his extended debates about liberalism, to help boost my profile if nothing else, but obviously I misjudged all of that completely. The second reason that the Gatsby podcast didn't really work out is because I fell out of love with the artsy concept of it quite early. Mostly because I didn't have the technical knowledge, skills or patience to properly pull it off. So as a result of that, my motivation just progressively tanked, to the point that I gave up and poured all of my resources into getting my PhD finished, which was the right thing to do at the time. But look, things are very different now. The PhD is done. I'm a lot wiser about what actually gets rewarded in the businesses of academia and political commentary. But more importantly than that, I'm not under any illusions about who I am in my own natural limitations. A lot of people, like some who I've met, have got surprisingly far in this business. Not necessarily by being the most astute political analysts, but by being very talented socialites. Like, they're very good at saying the right things to the right people in the right places at the right time. They have a natural talent for working out what's practically required to immediately better themselves at every opportunity. But more often than not, they succeed because they're utterly relentless. As a mere observer these days, it's honestly like watching a choking combustion engine at a high altitude. Like these people, they have the ability to part their conscience and integrity, not only to open doors for themselves, but to close doors on others if they think it helps them in some way. Look, I've no shame in saying that there's a place for that in politics to an extent, because people like that make effective politicians, let's not kid ourselves. But it's not who I am. Despite the very clear and obvious rewards on offer, that will never be who I am. I understand, I'm just not in competition with these people. I don't even want to be a politician, because politics would eat me from the inside if I tried. My ambition has always been and still is to use the knowledge I have to help whoever genuinely wants to salvage something for the sake of this suffering civilization and all of the suffering citizens within all of the suffering countries, whether these people happen to be dissident academics, journalists, or politicians. I'm using this channel to try to do that, and for personal reasons too, because look, I do enjoy contributing. I have seriously missed being able to do so. I'm not concerned anymore with how well this channel does commercially or algorithmically, and I especially couldn't care less about whether my videos get 100, 1,000, or even just 10 views. What matters to me now is that I'm actually doing something, and that my insights are just available if somebody wants them. I've no idea how often I'm going to upload videos or what the videos would be about, because it depends on too many things. But I'm willing to do what I can and just see how things go. If by chance, however, you do want to help me build my channel, and the best thing you can do is like my videos, share this video, because this is, I guess, my official statement of intent, and subscribe to the channel. I may make another edition fairly soon, but I might not. In any case, take good care, and I will maybe see you soon. Goodbye.